Tonight, we're hearing from a former FBI profiler who says the blood tells the story in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. The mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie vanished nearly 3 months ago, but her disappearance remains a chilling mystery. Investigators have found few clues that we know of. Among them, these grainy images of a masked man on her porch the night she disappeared. And then, of course, there's the blood spatter on her doorstep, which DNA testing confirmed belonged to the 84-year-old grandmother. But while these clues may seem limited, my next guest says these images provide a treasure trove of information on Guthrie and what happened to her that night. Retired Special Agent Bill Jim Clemente has drilled down on these pictures frame by frame, and to try and fill in the blanks on this baffling mystery, he joins me now to share what he found. Jim, great to see you. We should say you were an FBI profiler. It was your job on tough cold cases to come in and reverse engineer, try and figure out who they should be looking for. Let's first take a look at the blood images. The first one is this image. It's a wide shot of the blood spatter on the doorstep. What does that tell you when you look at it? Well, it tells a story of a snapshot of time. There's low velocity blood spatter, there's medium velocity blood spatter, and then there's on the right-hand side you see a blood smear. That means somebody impacted that blood after it hit the floor, stepped on it, rubbed an arm or a hand through it, something like that. What do the blood drops tell you? Well, the bigger droplets tell us that because there's no directionality, that they were dropped almost directly from above. But the smaller droplets tell a different story, which is what? Well, they're actually medium velocity drug blood droplets, which means that they were coughed out, they were aspirated and then coughed out. And I know that because some of these blood that you can see, they're sort of rings rather than the whole solid droplet. And that meant that they hit the ground as a bubble. They had air in them. And that can only happen when somebody coughs or sneezes out blood. So what does all that tell you? We know this blood is Nancy's. What does that, studying that blood, what does that tell you about what was happening to her at that moment? Me, that her face was within a foot, probably several inches above the ground, almost directly above that first upper left blood stain. And it tells me that this is probably where she made her last stand, where she fought her abductor. She was 84 and could barely walk. I understand, but this is probably where she gave them the initiative to hit her in the face. She started bleeding, it went down her throat, she coughed it up as she went down to the ground here. This tells me that was most likely only one offender because 2 offenders would have had control of her completely, and she would never have made her way down to the ground so close to be able to make that blood spatter, that medium velocity blood spatter. How could one person do this? She was 84, she could barely walk, she wasn't tiny. Carrying another human being, no matter what size they are, I don't believe he was carrying her until after this point. At this point, she was ambulatory, and I believe she was punched. She was injured, she went down to her knees, and her face was very close to the ground when she coughed up this blood. And after that, he picked her up and carried her away. Getting to her to that point, he had a gun, and a very visible gun, when he was on his way in. He used that gun to control her, but at this point, she fought back. All right, so you're using your FBI profiler skills to really study everything you have, and which isn't much we have in the public sphere. But what using your skills as a profiler is the story to you on who this person is, who took her. Well, if 2 of the ransom notes were real, then part of the motivation was money, but I believe that there may have been a second motivation, and that is probably to hurt Savannah Guthrie by taking her mother, by depriving her of that. And that could have been based on some interaction that this offender had with the mother or with Savannah in the past. Could have been weeks or months or years ago. It could also have been just a delusion in his own mind. And he could have built up an anger and a resentment against her, and as a result, he felt justified in taking the mother to hurt her. So I'm hearing you say you think it was a man, you think it was a man who was acting alone, and you think it was a man who had some sort of obsession with Savannah. I think that's the highest probability. Every morning, and, became obsessed somehow. And he may have had some delusion going on in his brain and that nobody else knew about, or that he maybe spoke to some people about, and that's how we might be able to catch him, because at some point, somebody out there will recognize that this guy always talked about her or said he was going to come into some money, or right as this happened, as the images were released, he left town because he had an emergency. Super quick, Jim. Do you think, given, I know these are all your theories as a pro, you are a profiler and this is your expertise, clears throat. Was she alive for any portion of the time she was missing? Well, she was certainly alive up until that point where she fell in her own front stoop. So when he took her, she was alive. All right, Jim Clemente. We will continue to follow this case until hopefully the mystery is solved for the sake of everybody involved, hopefully soon. Thank you. Investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance is nearing the 3-month mark tonight with no new leads, no arrests, and most importantly, no sign of Nancy Guthrie. Skepticism and scrutiny of the investigation, on the other hand, are in abundance, particularly regarding Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos. Since there is no progress to report, many are asking why. And now it's more than just bad PR. Sheriff Nanos is the focus of a probe himself, and it could cost him his job. It's not for his present actions, however, with the Guthrie investigation. It's rather about allegations in his past. The Pima County Board of Supervisors is leading the investigation after reports that Sheriff Nanos misrepresented his work history on his resume while he was at the El Paso Police Department before he joined Pima County's. The board demanded Nanos disclose all circumstances about his departure from the El Paso department and to clarify the dates of his employment as well as any prior disciplinary actions. Nanos's attorney responded yesterday with a 22-page document. It reads in part that whatever the sheriff did or did not do before being elected is necessarily unrelated to his performance of his duties in office. Whether others agree remains to be seen. The board will review the sheriff's answers in an executive session in a few weeks. For more, we're joined by Dr. Matthew Hines, Vice Chair for the Pima County Board of Supervisors. Matthew, it's great to have you. Did he refuse to answer the questions about disciplinary action that was taken against him at the El Paso Police Department? Yeah, it certainly seems pretty problematic to me. I mean, I've reviewed his responses with my team, with some other lawyers as well, and I'm certainly not satisfied with these responses. And what he did in El Paso, I mean, one of the things he was suspended for, 37 days of suspension in El Paso, 15 of those days occurred after he beat almost to death a handcuffed robbery suspect who was in the back of a squad car with a flashlight. He's a bad cop. He made really bad decisions and then lied about his past to convince then Pima County officials to hire him back in 1984. He also lied about that gap in time. He used to say 1982, so that got changed. The point here is this man we shouldn't even know his name. We should not know the name Nanos. He has perpetrated a fraud for 4 decades upon my community. And it is, frankly, it's shameful and insulting to the 1,500 men and women of that amazing law enforcement agency that he heads currently. Every day he walks in the door, going that story of beating a suspect who was handcuffed with a flashlight until you say beat him nearly to death. Were there charges filed? I mean, that would certainly seem to call for some criminal charges. I don't look. The El Paso Police Department was sued over this matter, and eventually that was one of the things that led the El Paso Police Department to force him to resign in lieu of termination. That gentleman was put in the ICU for days, and there were multiple news stories about that at the time when it happened. What do you make? I mean, he is saying, look, whatever I did or didn't do decades ago has nothing to do with how I'm leading the Guthrie investigation and how I'm currently serving as sheriff of Pima County. You clearly don't buy that. Not at all. Look, these actions are incredibly significant. The fact that he came to Pima County and the first official act that he did here was to lie about his history, and that's how he got peace officer certification. Nobody can be serving in law enforcement at any level in the state of Arizona unless they get peace officer certification, and he could not have possibly revealed that history to the board at the time that this happened, that he got a job, and that means he perpetrated a fraud for decades upon the people of my community. And how do you think he has handled the Nancy Guthrie investigation? As you know, there's been a lot of questions about how we handled the crime scene, how we handled the DNA evidence. What is your assessment? So I'm a physician and I'm a supervisor on the board. I'm not in law enforcement, but I will say relationships in these kinds of situations matter and time matters. And I say that because it is pretty clear that his past run-ins with the Federal Bureau of Investigation back in 2015, when he was almost indicted for RICO charges at the time, which they did not end up going forward with, he has held a grudge against the FBI and refused to fully work with them going forward. And I think we see examples of the results of that with regard to the most recent high-profile investigation. And maybe jeopardized elements of that, do you think? Yes or no? Very possible. Matthew Hines, keep us posted. Very important what you're saying. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Ed Smart is the father of Elizabeth Smart, who was kidnapped from her bedroom back in 2002, leaving no trace, was finally found held captive in a makeshift campsite after 9 long months. Ed Smart joins me now. Thank you so much for taking the time, sir. It's always good to see you. Good to see you, Jeff. What is your message to the public right now? What is your message to them about why they shouldn't give up, why they shouldn't lose focus on this? Because I know it's a busy news cycle and it always changes. but what is your message to the public right now? Who may be the answer? Who may see something and say something? I think that it's really important to, one, not go into conspiracy theories. I don't think there's much value in that. Of course, the Guthries have been looked at. They've supposedly been cleared. So that should no longer really be out there in the public, regardless of whether people are searching around the house or not. I think it's important to keep information coming. Savannah and the family, more information about their mother. That was one thing that our family continually tried to do, was to keep new information coming out. We don't know what law enforcement has, whether they have any DNA that's of any value or not. And, sometimes law enforcement really does not disclose what they have, and that can be problematic. We hoped that a lot of information would be forthcoming from law enforcement, but they kept a lot of that to themselves along with the FBI. So you don't know what they know, and hopefully they will help to bring more information out so that there's more interest in furthering this. But I think keeping Nancy's face out there, more information about Nancy, is really key. Being able to keep your eyes open for the possibilities. I think, one thing that we worried about with Elizabeth was that maybe not everyone saw her face, or that they would remember to keep their eyes open. And really that was what brought Elizabeth home. I'm hoping that, they're staying on social media enough and that law enforcement is following that, because that certainly can lead to details that, may not have come forth yet. So, yeah, I mean, you mentioned something. It was interesting, even despite being by authorities, these, citizen journalists, they've still been seemingly hounding her, Savannah's sister and Savannah's sister's husband. So it's a very distressing situation. One of the things I wanted to also bring out of this, the family, and this is a unique perspective, how do you, yes, maintain hope? You continue to have a presence in this investigation, speak to law enforcement, but how do you, it's the wrong word, not move on, but how do you continue on with your life? Savannah, going back to the Day Show, how do you do that? How do you still stay focused on this, trying to get answers, holding out hope, and yet at the same time trying to live your life? That is a really good thing to bring out, because we certainly found ourselves in that same situation. 3 months in, of course, the media had died way down. We would get tips that continue to come in. Law enforcement received those, was constantly going through them. They had, conspiracy theorists, they had psychics, they had all sorts of nutcases out there, that basically detoured really the focus. And so we as a family tried to, I felt that Elizabeth was still out there, and I don't know what, Savannah and her siblings are feeling. You certainly get to the point where you just want the whole thing to be over with, and whatever is going to come, have it come. And it's really a tough thing, but I think that keeping new information coming out about Nancy, making her a real person, which they have done that to an extent, but we were always looking for new information to share with the public about Elizabeth and about, what we could get from law enforcement. Another thing that I really feel I have no idea what they've done or what they haven't done is to bring say a private investigator in. We've heard from, different former FBI agents talking about DNA, but I think having a second look by professionals that really can see to make sure that everything's covered. Yeah, that's actually a really good point, Ed. We have about a minute left. I do wonder, and I sometimes see this in cases when you think there's a lot of attention on it at the beginning, you think it's going to be solved immediately. Not always the case. Have you seen, and what would be your perspective with about a minute left, that when a case kind of goes quiet, there may be a break? Perhaps the person who did something, their guard goes down, and that could be an interesting perspective, right? Absolutely. That's very possible. But I think, as long as they keep Nancy's face out there, that is really key, because someone might come across her or might remember something, and keeping that information is really important. That is why we're doing this tonight. That is why we're covering this story tonight. That is why we're still talking about Nancy on day 83, and that is why we have you on. Ed Smart, thank you so much for taking the time. Such great perspective, and I hope Savannah and her family were able to hear it and maybe take some of that advice. Thank you so much, sir. It was good seeing you. Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our News Nation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.